Okay. Welcome to Fossil Creek. Today we're going to be talking about vegetables and herbs and companion plants. We're all over the map. So you can do, and we'll be hitting on also doing them in pots and raised beds. So there are some of the items that in a pot or in a raised bed is kind of the magic formula. Just as an example, if you want to do lavenders, if you're going to try to do it in-ground vegetable bed, well, we have a wide area here, so some people come in here and they say, oh, I have sandy loam soil. Well, it's like, well, good for you. You're the exception. Most people have alkaline clay, caliche, or rock. So in those cases, a raised bed or a big pot's the way to go. Even if you have great soil, you'd want to be mixing in some planter's mix, something like that, to improve the texture and fertility of the soil. But for things that are touchy like lavender, it's easy to be successful because they don't want to stay have their roots stay soggy. When you're doing it in a pot or a raised bed, that's easy to do because you've got control of the soil. In a situation like that, though, just to be clear, we're not talking about digging up soil out of your yard and putting it in a pot, or even going to a nursery and buying topsoil. That's not what that's for. You know, topsoil, if you're going to be working on some turf and you need to level out some places or whatever, use topsoil. But it's not typically for pots or raised beds. On those, you're going to use an improved or a higher quality of soil or soil mix. I've got an assortment here, so we will be identifying and we'll touch a little bit on companion planting. We have a handout that you've got. And of course, just a note about a garden area. It helps if you want to cultivate having pollinators around and good guys, then you can't go wrong doing your best to have year-round flowers. And some could be better than others, but in general, if you have things blooming in your garden year-round, that's a plus. It's going to bring in pollinators. It's also going to give cover for good bugs, ladybugs, lacewings, those kinds of things. And of course, I have one of the most commonly named companion plants here, marigolds. And the other thing about having something constantly in bloom going to help to get you out in the garden. You know, it helps if it's beautiful, and blooms are the thing. And of course, I go through this. I have an annual attitude adjustment. You know, when I'm out of the presence of marigolds, and I see them in books and magazines, you know, I think marigolds, ho-hum, yawn, please. But then when we get them in and you look at them up close, they are just not that blasé. They're pretty special. And of course, there's a bunch of neat varieties. But when you get them in and you see them in person, it seems like especially the oranges, they look like they have a little electricity going through them. You know, it's not just a plain color. They really do look neat up close. And of course, you have a great assortment of colors, and they kind of confuse the bugs, so that's an added plus. And you can like or not like the fragrance, but it's not a rose, but not everything's going to be a rose. So I like the smell of them. And of course, you know, if you've heard any of these before, you know, I love aromatherapy, but speaking of smells, tomato plants, you know, I think I like the smell of tomato plants at least as much as the taste of tomatoes, you know. That is just such a neat, you can't make this stuff up, you know. Those just smell great, you know. It smells like there's something going on. But we had a little discussion before we started about, you know, fall gardening. We're kind of late for spring, but we're getting into the fall gardening time. But also, and it's not even, it's a little bit of a misnomer or kind of misleading to say fall, because you think, well, that's a whole ways off. But there are a bunch of things that will bloom or fruit and you'll harvest later in the summer, like late summer, early fall. And, you know, those are things like cucumbers and squash and zucchini. You can still plant watermelon, okra. These things bloom into the fall. In fact, so I don't have to remember everything, because I can tell you right now I'm not going to. So if you were looking forward to a memory demonstration, you came to the wrong thing. So I'll just note a couple things here about the stuff that you can be harvesting that you can plant now, and you've got a long harvest out there. Green beans, cantaloupe, cucumber, okra, southern peas, peppers, tomatoes, watermelons. You know, and of course, in reading those off, you probably realize, well, those are a bunch of things that, except for, I guess, tomatoes, those are a bunch of things that really like heat. And all of those probably, except tomatoes, you'd have great luck just planting them from seed. They'll be up quick because the soil is warm. And those things, most of those, you'll be harvesting into September, October, even November on those. So it's not like, well, it's behind us, better luck next year. There's a bunch ahead of us. So it's worthwhile to garden. And of course, the neat thing about the fall season is that as you go into fall, which as opposed to spring, as you go into fall, the weather gets milder. Whereas in spring, it gets more hostile as you proceed, you know, getting into heat. The fall, it just gets more comfortable for us and the plants. So a neat time to be out in the garden. And speaking of harvesting, of course, and containers and raised beds, peppers, you know, you can harvest in the summer on into the fall. They're good for raised beds because you've got a lot of productivity and they don't use that much space. And let me see, and as I mentioned before, highly ornamental. And those you could also plant from seed. But we've got, you know, Tabasco and habanero, and this guy here, what is he? Very descriptive. It's a chili pepper. So if there was any mystery, solved. Okay. So, and of course, and see all those hot weather things that I mentioned that will bear on into the fall. It's worth noting that I brought this one out. He's a little long a tooth. I wouldn't want to do it, but you know, they have it in themselves. They really want to do a good job. They want to do such a good job that they don't even wait till they're in the ground. You know, if you don't get them in there, this is a sugar baby watermelon plant, and there's the beginning of the sugar baby in a 4-inch pot. He thinks he can do a watermelon. So imagine if they think they can do it and they try to do it in a 4-inch pot. What if you put them in a raised bed or a big pot or your garden? You know, it's kind of almost a cinch. And of course, I don't think we may not have listed, but it did say melons on there, and that would include cantaloupe. You know, same kind of thing. Loves the heat and will produce. And let's see. And let's see. Okay. And now we can talk about some herbs, since the neat thing about herbs, and I've already mentioned the lavender, is that most of the herbs are perennials. So, which means they come back. And of course, a lot of the herbs, they're not only perennials, but they're evergreen. So basically, they're kind of like little shrubs. They don't go away. They just keep producing and getting bigger, more productive, and a bigger contribution. The one we can't overlook on the table this morning, bay leaf. You know, if you're into gumbo, you've seen those guys floating around in there. And this one, and this is a 7-gallon size. And those guys are evergreen and hardy. And they have one, I hope it's still there, in Fort Worth Botanical Gardens, and it's in the perennial garden. And the last I saw it, it was like over 20 feet tall and big around. I've meant to, but I haven't gotten back there since the big freeze, because I'm curious, since it was so big and established, how it weathered the big freeze. So news when I discover it. But it had been there prior to that for, 20 or 30 years. So it's something that is dependable. And of course, the freeze we had last year, that would be what would be considered a generational event. So we've got 2 of those on record. That one that happened, and one in '83. And other than that, there aren't any of those on the records. Of course, they go back 140 years, so we don't know about 200 or 300 years ago. But anyway, if there are 40 years between them, that's a good sign. But anyway, this guy typically is very dependable, needs decent drainage, full sun, and if we had a forecast of, it's going to -5, I guess I'd be out there with my quilt and a hot bulb at the bottom of it or something, but that's unlikely to be necessary. But a neat looking shrub, and gets moderate growth. It's not real fast, but it can get very large. And let's see. And I don't know if I mentioned this. This was our little tomato. If you do start planting tomatoes, they're the exception to the rule. Didn't hurt a bit. You can plant them deeper and all along the stem. It will root out. So it just improves the vigor of the plant. As with anything, the bigger the root ball or base, the better. So, and then of course, as with on tomatoes, important, but on a bunch of others too, I put a mulch after I planted it, like hardwood mulch, no more than an inch on the soil to separate the soil from the foliage. That cuts down on pathogens on the foliage. And let's see. And of course, the perennial, on things like lavender, there are some that are and some that aren't. So on some of them, like this one, Goodwin Creek, it'll say right back on the tag on the back, perennial. So that's a hardy lavender, and some of them they'll say annual. In other words, they're not going to take a hard freeze like we would probably get. So you could do that, but you'd want to do it in a container to where you could protect it on those few really bad nights. Even the ones that are annual will take some cold. They just, if it gets really cold, they're not going to make it like the tough ones. Let's see. And those are both Goodwin Creek. And let's see. And while I'm thinking about it, an update on our past mentions of dill and fennel and parsley. And if you wanted to have swallowtail butterflies around, we have one right there who showed up and ate, made a chrysalis, and he or she is just now unfolding and straightening her wings. So we're not just making false promises here. When we say they're going to show up, they show up. Not because we said it. They do it regardless of what we say or do. But a lot of fun. And okay. And of course, the rosemaries, those are, we have a variety of those, and they are useful as a landscape plant. They're evergreen. They come in various sizes. And let me see. I think that's an upright, so going to get very tall, which like 4 or 5 feet. And then, of course, I'm pretty sure this guy is the Tuscan Blue. That's also a very large one. It's kind of one of the oldies but goodies. It makes a big shrub. It can go 4, 5, 6, maybe even 7 feet, and is a culinary variety, but used for that for years. And then a new one, which is not blooming white. Those are blooms from our overhead crepe myrtle. But the stems on it do look kind of white. That one's a chef's choice. It just came out in the last 3 or 4 years. It was developed to be a high quality culinary use, and it gets like 1.5 feet by 1.5 feet. And of course, rosemaries, like lavender, want to have good drainage and a lot of sun, 8 hours plus. They'll take it all day. The rosemary's a little more resilient and tougher than lavender, but they both want to have decent drainage. But also on lavenders, and especially if you have it in a container, they could be considered, drought resistant, but they're not a prickly pear. They don't want to be dry and stay dry. Around here, because they're in a container, relatively small container and exposed to a lot of heat, we make sure that they can get dry, but we make sure that they don't stay dry. But if they get dry and they're dry in the morning and then they go through a hard day without water, it wouldn't kill them, but it can affect their appearance. You know, it can stress them out to where they look stressed. And depending on how long they are stressed, it might be a while before their appearance pop back. So, but they will tell you, like other plants, you know, when they're getting dry, they won't have the dark color. They start to be a lighter green, kind of a grayish green, and the new growth, you know, is gonna curl down. So you give them a drink, they'll pop right back up. And I say that because a lot of people think of them, well, they're a Mediterranean origin, so, you know, I don't really have to keep an eye on them as far as water is concerned. They're not water hogs, but like I say, when we're getting up in the upper 90s or worse, they don't want to stay dry. And let's see. Let's see. And we'll take a break from the ones that you're going to eat to some oddballs, because I feel an affinity, you know, with the oddball. But we'll just mention that we do have cilantro, but getting a little late on that guy. And of course, in case you were wondering, you were looking around and you said, I can't find coriander anywhere. It's the seed of cilantro. Cilantro is the foliage, and then coriander is the seed that it produces. But cilantro, it's a kind of fall to winter to spring plant. It doesn't like the summer. So we have it, but you know, it's not coming into its element at this point. And some of our other oddballs, just for fun, and I love aromatherapy items. We have lemon eucalyptus, which it smells kind of like a creamy lemon, and they get big. They're not winter hardy, but if you take it out of the little pot, put it in a big pot, it'll get taller than me, and neat foliage and a neat smell. And if you put it in a pot, you can nurse it through the winter, protecting it. And then we got a different one this year, of course, the silver eucalyptus that's been around forever. And of course, both of those, when they want to drink, they want to drink. But if you want to upset this one, you know, keep it soggy, and it declines. So give them a drink when they want it. And another one of the difference, stevia, just for fun. Of course, that's the sweetener, and of course, it's an annual, full sun, and they are sweet. And let's see. And here's an herb it's another one that's kind of fun. It's not much in the culinary situation, but and I've mentioned them here before. Elfin thyme, the smallest leaf on the property, a neat ground cover, and if you were to plant a little clay rectangular planter, you know, or have something like on a centerpiece on your patio table, and you wanted, it wasn't that big of a pot, and you wanted something that wasn't, you wouldn't plant a mint in there because it would want to grow and cover the whole table and the whole patio. But if you put things like this little elfin thyme in there, it's not going to, you know, grow out of scale, and it's going to last a long time. And I not only like gorgeous, but I'm pretty partial to cute too, and those are about as cute as it gets. and a lot of sun, good drainage. The one thing they can't stand, if they're in a whole lot of shade, you know, they're done. And let's see. And of course, if we want to do something for our little friends, you know, catnip doesn't do much for me, but nice to have around. And let's see. What do we got here? And here's another aromatherapy thing. And this one is, they say perennial on this lemon verbena. It could be a little bit at risk if it were to be really cold, but it develops kind of a woody stem. And if you rub the leaf, it smells just like lemon drop candy. So, and it's cute too. Let's see. And of course, here's the bouquet dill, which is one of our swallowtail's chosen items over there. And of course, another thing that's pretty neat if you wanted to do a small container that would live for a long time and would be a good neighbor, wouldn't cover his neighbors in the pot. We've got onion chives, which will bloom pink, and garlic chives, which bloom white, and those live for a long time, and they're tough as nails. They'll take the winter and also be highly ornamental and something you can use frequently in culinary use. And tough. And of course, here's the standbys, large leaf sweet basil and one of the most popular Genovese sweet basil. And those are the exceptions. They are not perennials. Those are annuals. They not only don't like it cold, they don't even like it getting close to cold. They're one of the first things to wilt. So if it never got below 50, they'd think that was just perfect. But grow quick, very productive. And let's see. And of course, and here's another time that is creeping mother of thyme, which is another ground cover type. Not a bad smell, but it's not really culinary per se. It's more of a landscape item. But we do have English thyme, which is a better smell, and it is culinary. And we've got two of the lemon thyme. This one's variegated, and we also have the green over there. And of course, all those are tough perennials. Will take a lot of sun and will bloom in the summer, although the bloom's no big deal. But tough perennials and on a small scale. So now we'll talk about contrast. Those were the well-behaved. These are the non-behavers. Not poorly behaved, but just no restraint at all. And this is julep mint. All the mints are they're best in their own pot because if you put them in with something else, they'll try to overrun it and probably will. And also not in the ground because you'll come a point where you want it out and then you've got all these little bits of mint that you didn't get that resprout. So a good one to do in a pot. You could even do them in a hanging basket since they come out and trail. And And then, of course, spearmint, which is love it or hate it. I think it's pretty neat. And then here's one that chocolate mint, and it does smell like chocolate. And I showed that to a person who will remain nameless, and she said, "Wow, that does smell like chocolate. I had no idea that such things existed." Needless to say, this was a relatively young person because, nowadays when somebody comes in and says, ask me about a plant, and they say, does that come in a variegated form? And if I've never seen a variegated one, I'm still hesitant to say no, because there's at 70, there's a lot I haven't seen. And I have made that mistake in the past to those kind of questions and said, oh no. And it wouldn't be 2 days later in a book or a magazine or a newspaper, I see just what they were asking about, which I said, oh no, never. And there it is. So who knows what may be out there, but we do know for certain that chocolate mint is out there, and it lives up to its billing. And of course, and just some more of the culinary ones, Italian oregano, which that's another perennial, tough as nails. Not much to look at, but that's not what it does. That's not how it helps us. And then French tarragon, which another tough one. And these used to be difficult 20, 30 years ago. When I used to get these in, it was like, try to keep that alive. And I don't know what's happened, but now when we get them in, as long as you don't just kill it with water, they hang in there. So I don't know if it's an improvement in the plant or improvement in the soil or what, but now these guys, you can get them and make them work. They're not so fickle. And of course, that was Italian oregano, also Greek oregano, similar kind. And then parsley. And that one is another one that is, of course, it's not a major league thing to eat, although, it is a culinary use, but it has a really neat texture. It's a biennial, grows the plant first year and second year it blooms or whatever. But the key thing to remember is it's winter hardy, and it's gorgeous, crinkly green, and can get up this tall, this wide, and that's one of my favorites to use either in a flower bed, a raised bed, or a pot with things like pansies and ornamental kale, because it's a neat the kind of
And this guy, this now comes back. This they made it through the winter, and then this mid-spring, it showed its salvia heritage. It came into bloom. So, and your typical bluish, salvia bloom, but a really neat, tough plant. Sweet and jorum. I used my left hand. I don't think it's contaminated. Yeah, and that is another one that like oregano. It's not much to look at, but and this one, it's an annual, but culinary use and a neat smell, tough, and as with most of these, virtually full sun. Of course, around here, full sun, since we are where we are, if you get 6 hours, between 10 and 5, that's full sun. Doesn't have to have it all day, although we would take it just fine. So, I can't believe it. I made it this far. I got a schedule. So, I'll open it up to questions. And if I don't know, got some reference books. We'll figure it out. Yes.
I just have one. I've read different opinions about whether you let your herbs bloom. Is there, especially like some of them are long-lived, is it an issue as far as letting them bloom?
Well, typically on the things like
Especially basil. Yeah.
Typically the approach is you're not going to let it bloom. You're wanting to keep it in a vegetative state, and on that, and of course, if you're harvesting it and using it, that's going to put the brakes on that, because when you're harvesting, that's the part that's up here. That's what's going to come into bloom. But I've read something where it says it affects the flavor and so on and so forth.
Right.
But also, a lot of things when they bloom, it's kind of like I fulfilled my mission in life, which is to make seeds. So now I'm done. So it also gets in the way of that. But that's the most common one that I think of. And of course, when they mention that, it's not a matter of you take a little bit off. Because I think we will go down like 1, 2, 3 nodes, and then you pinch it off. Because if you just go back a little bit, the guy next to him, he's ready to bloom in 2 more days. So you take it several nodes back and use that, and that restrains the
Is that the main one that you usually work on? Okay.
And it's an annual.
I had a friend who was a chef, and he had one like, it was on his patio,
Right.
so it was ginormous.
And of course, when you do it like that, like I say, if you're using it
Right.
a lot, it's not going to get to the bloom point. Because you're taking off what would have bloom.
Right.
So that's the easy part. And of course, the flip side of that is that things like lavender, that's half the point. Is the blooms.
Right.
Of course, on that one though, as anybody that's around here or works here sees me going back. I'm an avid deadheader. And, 2 things. When you deadhead things, like, have 2 benefits, like roses, you get rid of an ugly bloom and you encourage another one. And on lavenders, when their blooms fade, So you take it all the way down to where the foliage is, and it makes it much cleaner appearance, and it encourages the blooms to keep going. And I think it may have been this variety, but a few years back we had some in a raised bed that I planted up here, and I thought, well, I put in a gallon-sized lavender, and I thought, well, we'll see what the blooming is like on this. And me being me, it was right over here, and as I walked coming and going, we never had them get to this point. When they faded just the least little bit, you know, I went over and took it out. And I thought, you'll see when the blades or the blooms fade or whatever. We went all through the summer and all through the fall, and I never saw it slow up at all. It just bloomed its head off, and it was just absolutely gorgeous. But it was in a raised bed, so its roots were happy, and it just didn't stop. So a lot of fun. And of course, another, and this is a minor tip. But going in with your scissors, and this is on shrubs or whatever, or these, don't go in like that. Go in close. And you come at the point where you think you're going to need to prune, and then you let it open up and position it and do the cut. Because if you have it the least little bit open, you know, as you're going in, you're going to catch something else. And you might end up cutting it off, and I've done this, and I'm like, didn't mean to do that. I cut off the bud instead of the spent bloom because I was just in a hurry and careless. So just keep it closed until you get where you want it, and then you open it up, and then you're going to make the cut that you want to make. And what goes along with that is make sure that when you're about to cut something, that you know what all is attached to that. Because I've also done it here where I cut it, and then it's like, oh, I didn't realize that. Okay. So anyway, be careful when you're trimming. And fingers here. I know that, you know, that's my most memorable film was when years ago these things are really sharp. I was holding on, I was drilling through a limb, went through and got my finger and leaned on it, and that was a learning experience. That was 40-something years ago. I haven't done that again. Those are memorable experiences that avoid that. Any other questions? Okay. I think we're good. Thanks for coming in.